And we will go to question number 16. Gooman 130 says, hey, Mike, how do we reconcile the treatment of foreigner slaves, not Israelite servitude, under the old covenant, bought as property handed down to children? Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. Man, at this late for my brain in the stream here, I wish I had more juice to talk about this issue because it's a big deal. Leviticus 25. For your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you and their clans that are with you. You've been born in your land, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. There's a lot of details I'd like to get into, but I don't have the time or memory at the moment. Let me say a few things that how I think we are wise to approach the issue. One, we should not require societal perfection of the Old Testament law for a couple reasons. One issue is, and if you don't have this requirement, if you don't think that the law had to be, bringing societal perfection, then you're going to change the way you approach things, like how it deals with, say, divorce, or how it deals, like Jesus, we'll talk about that, or how it deals with things like slavery. So one issue is that if you do this, then, man, my brain's going already. I feel it. So this is probably not my best answer on this complicated issue. This is exactly the moment where I'm like, oh, should have had a gallon of coffee. So one of the issues there is that. Another issue is Jesus seems to affirm that the Old Testament law is not imperfect, or not bad, or not God-breathed or something like that, but rather that it is situational, and that the carnality of man and the evilness of man brought in laws that are not ideal. Catch this? This is hugely important. The evilness of man brought in laws that are not ideal. And the law's function was usually, at that point, it seems, to curb some of the abuses or some of the problems that might have happened otherwise in that scenario. Jesus' example is divorce. When they ask him in like Mark 9, I think it is, where he's asked, hey, why did Moses allow them to divorce if you don't want us to divorce our wives? And he says, well, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. Moses is not being meant as a personal slur against Moses here. He refers to the law. The law allowed for your divorces because of your evil hearts. You're going to create such situations in your marriage and in your separations from each other that divorce is going to be regulated, but not approved. Did you catch that? It was regulated, but not approved. And so slavery, like the issue of divorce, was every society in the world problem up until very recent times. And if you have slavery going on at all times, in all cultures of up until recently, then it is something that's understandably regulated, even if it's not approved. Other issues. So now, once you have that in mind, you go, oh, so what I would be looking for is how Israel's slavery laws were different than the laws of the nations around them, to see how God was limiting abuses and limiting the harm that is caused by this stuff. Other issues would be the difference between slavery in your head and slavery in the ancient Near East in historical times. And there is radical differences between the two, guarantee it, because we're raised with a certain perspective on this stuff. And I have a teaching on slavery where I talk about some of these issues. Other reasons is to look at not just one law, but the other laws of Israel. Like the fact that Israel becomes an underground railroad effectively for slaves. If a slave runs from his master and runs to, say you're in one town of Israel, you're a slave, you're being mistreated, you flee to another town of Israel. When you get there, like the Code of Hammurabi would say, you send that slave back to his master, and if you don't, you're going to be punished physically with, I forget, it was cutting your hand off or something like that, or maybe the death penalty, if you don't send that slave back to his master. The Bible's like, no. If a slave flees from his master, you give him a place to sleep and lay and live, some property to live on in this new town, and you don't send him back to his master. The default assumption was if a slave fled, he must have had good reason. If a man had beaten a slave and abused the slave, then the slave would go free. If he killed the slave, the man could get the death penalty himself. These are all things that have to be seen as God removing some of the harm and some of the abuse and the oppression that comes in a all society's worldwide institution of slavery that was actually how a lot of poor people would even make a living back then and get protection and stuff. Anyway, super complicated issue. The people from other lands can't be, this is the final thing I'll say, they can't be completely covered by the laws of Israel because they're in these other lands. And so if their option in being slaves is I'm a slave over here or I'm a slave over there, it would have been way better for them to be a slave in Israel than anywhere else. They're even going to be getting rest days and stuff like this in Israel. They're going to be getting higher rights in Israel. So this would have been an overall improvement. And so what I would say in light of that is God is regulating a generally bad practice, not creating the practice itself. We look at it like it's being created, and it's not. So I take Jesus's words. Why does God even have this rules about slavery? Because the hardness of your hearts, right? Because of the hardness of your hearts. These things are allowed, but they're regulated. Oh, there's more that should be said about that. And I want to say more because I want to give people the appreciation of the goodness of Scripture at all times. And but that's all my brain's got at the moment.